Welcome to The Craft by Openspace, a series where we're exploring great leadership skills through conversations with some of the world's most storied people. And it's a real honor for us today to be joined by Professor Roger Martin to talk about strategy and what it takes to be a good strategic thinker. As an introduction, in 2017, Roger was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. Roger is a trusted strategy advisor to CEOs of companies worldwide, including Procter & Gamble, Lego, and Ford. He is also a former dean and institute director of the Martin Prosperity Institute at the Rothman School of Management at the University of Toronto in Canada. Roger has authored a dozen books, numerous Harvard Business Review articles, and has weekly posts on The Medium. So Roger, what an absolute pleasure to have you on The Craft. So let's dive in, talk about strategy, a word that's used very often in business, a lot of times referring to some sort of action plan to achieve a goal or an objective. But you know, you've obviously given this topic a little bit more thought than most of us. So what is strategy to you?
Well, I think of strategy as first and foremost choice. So it's choices that companies make to do some things and not other things. And I think of it as actually kind of an integrated set of choices that compel customers to do something that you want them to do. So it's choiceful, and I'm a sort of a stickler on what kind of a choice is a strategic choice. For me, when I read most strategic plans, the vast majority of strategic plans, they'll have choices like our choice is to be customer-centric, or our choice is to be operationally effective, or our choice is to value our talent. And the test I do to see whether it's actually a real and useful strategic choice is to ask the question, what is the opposite of the choice? So choice to be customer-centric, the opposite would be a choice to ignore our customers. And if the opposite is stupid on its face, then you haven't made a strategic choice, you've just made a choice not to be stupid. So operationally effective, well, the opposite would be operationally pathetic. Well, who does that and stays in business? Value our talent, to not care at all about our talent. Who does that and stays in business? So those aren't strategic choices. And those choices are not going to compel the action by customers that you would like. And the way I think, again, about strategy is strategy is an attempt to influence the variable that you don't control. So you control how much money you spend, how many people you have, where you distribute, how you brand. All those things are under your control. The thing that is not is customers. Customers will pull money out of their wallet and give it to whoever they feel is most deserving of it. And so a strategy is a set of choices that compel the thing you can't control to work the way you wish it would. Unfortunately, that is a tiny fraction of the strategies that are produced in the world. The vast majority of strategies are lists of platitudinous things like customer centricity and talent and you know, operationally effective and cost effective and then sort of goals, outcomes that you wish would happen, but you have no rationale for how they will. You know, we're going to be the most innovative company. Well, you know, kind of how might that happen? So I'm not a fan of most strategy in the world. Most strategy is planning. It's stuff done by technocrats to feel good about having organized themselves, whereas strategy is a more entrepreneurial activity. It's an activity that's designed to produce a desired output.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess given it's all about choice and you want people to be thinking about the right questions and in coming out with making choices that make a difference and help them win, what are some of these questions that one should be thinking about in coming up with something that's actually a strategy?
Well, I think of, and the model that I've written about in a book called Playing to Win is that there are 5 choices that you need to make to have a strategy. You have to make a choice about what's your winning aspiration, right? What are you trying to accomplish? 2, it's where you're going to play, right? Because every organization, every company has lots of territory that they could decide to play in. We're going to play in the high and the low end. We're going to play in Singapore. We're going to play in Southeast Asia. There are geographical aspects. There are customer aspects. So where are you going to play? And then how you're going to win. What is your theory of how on that place that you've chosen to play, you are better than anybody else so that you can win? Right? And then the 4th choice is what are the must-have capabilities, that is, the capabilities you must have to win in the way you are attempting to win where you've chosen to play to reach your winning aspiration. And then the final one is enabling management systems. What management systems do you have to put in place to build and maintain the capabilities to win where you've chosen to play to reach your winning aspiration? And I sort of repeat that up and down because I view it as a cascade of those 5. But the interesting thing about strategy is those 5 have to fit together and reinforce one another. So the beating heart of strategy is the where to play, how to win set of choices. But what I call the reality check is, do you have the capabilities and management systems that would allow you to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in your where to play, how to win choice? And the only way that'll happen is if competitors either can't or won't develop the capabilities that you've used to win in your unique way. So those are the fundamental choices that you have to think through in strategy.
So just touching on the first one, what is our winning aspiration? How does someone think about that? Because I guess it is kind of a broad question, and it might be internally focused versus externally focused. Do you kind of set a goal in relation to a specific target, or in relation to what you've done in the past?
Well, the most important characteristic of it is a match with the where to play, how to win, right? And that's why I say you can't sort of lock and load on your winning aspiration and then start to think, oh, now that we have that as our winning aspiration, where might we play? How might we win? The winning aspiration has to be consistent with those 2. But it's sort of a higher order thing, which says, here's what we'd like to be when we grow up, if you will, right? Here's how we want to be the best in a particular space. What is that space we want to be the best in, right? So like 4 Seasons, we want to be the best in the luxury hotel space. So our winning aspiration, if you ask Izzy Sharp, the founder of Four Seasons, what's their aspiration? Their aspiration is to be the #1 luxury hotel chain in the world and the definition of luxury service overall. But that only makes sense if you've got a where to play and a how to win that would enable you to be that winning player. And that requires choices. So it may seem hard and abstract to think about your winning aspiration on its own, because then anything is possible to say, whether it has any relevance and will ever be reality or not. But if you say, here's our potential winning aspiration, now is there a where to play and how to win that would make that a kind of a verified statement as opposed to just a dream? Then you might go back to the winning aspiration and say, well, I have to modify it in this way for it to fit. So again, strategy is about an integrative set of choices where all these things fit together.
I can see how these questions might be applicable at various levels of an organization or a company. So maybe at the top, and then each department might have to might answer the same questions, and maybe even at a personal level. Those might be applicable. Does it kind of apply that way?
Yeah. I think at any given level in the organization or every given place, there's only one strategy. There's only one strategy at the corporate level. However, at every level below that for a multi-business company, there are strategies. I mean, we were talking about what I've done in Singapore, and I've done work for Procter & Gamble, whose AAI region is headquartered in Singapore. And Procter & Gamble needs to have a strategy. AAI needs to have a strategy. Which countries are we going to focus on? How are we going to win in each of the countries in that sprawling region? Similarly, each of their major businesses, baby care, fem care, laundry, home care, each of those needs to have a strategy for how it's going to win. In each case, the strategy of that lower level unit, AAI versus the globe, the baby care category versus all the categories together, they have to fit together and reinforce, which is a challenge. And I like the fact you raised the personal playing when I've actually written a piece on that. I think it applies to you at the personal level, because you're where to play, right? That is where you're going to focus your energies. You've only got however many hours in the day you can work before you fall asleep. You can allocate those in many ways, right? You can allocate those to kind of, talking with your colleagues. You can allocate them to sitting at your desk or whatever. There's a lot. You can allocate them to the most forward-thinking part of your job versus the most backward and basic part of your job. You should have a aspiration for where you want to get, and then a where to play and a how to win that's consistent with that. And there are very different approaches to that. And I say this especially in the white collar world. I mean, if you look at white collar, you should go pull out your job description, Omesh. If you pull out your job description, the official job description, and ask yourself the question, do I do that stuff? The answer is almost always going to be, oh, wow, I do some of that stuff and actually spend a lot of my time on that stuff. And I actually, even though it's in my job description, I actually don't do hardly any of that. That's a where to play choice. And I'm assuming that you've made that where to play choice because you have a theory of how you will, by choosing to focus on those things, accomplish more against your winning aspiration. And so, yeah, the same strategy tool can be applied at kind of any level of aggregation.
No, I really like that idea that, strategy is not an activity that's exclusive to top management, and it's something that's relevant to everybody across the organization at various levels, and that kind of helps give a greater sense of ownership and control over how you shape what you're doing. So I really like that idea. What are some of the hindrances? You alluded to the fact that a lot of the activity around strategy is more strategic planning earlier. Why is it difficult for some or most organizations to adopt this type of thinking around strategy? Is it around how organization structure and decision making has evolved? What's difficult for people to adopt this?
I actually think it's sort of become a lost art. I think that's why it's difficult, is that people aren't trained on actually doing strategy. People are trained these days in business schools, which many businessmen and women go to, whether undergrad or graduate level, like an MBA. They are taught analytical techniques. And so people come out thinking that if they do enough analyses of the sort they learned at business school, a strategy will pop out of it. And that's not my experience. My experience is you'll get a lot of analyses, right? And so that's one thing that hinders it. Another thing is that there is a love, especially as corporations get larger, for planning, right? And in fact, often the dominant form of planning in most companies is budgeting. That's a plan. That's a plan for how much money we're going to spend and a plan for how much money that's going to come in. And what happens is strategy gets plug fit, made plug compatible to the budget. And often it's simply a budget with pros. So it explains, kind of why these numbers are what they are, and says, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this. It's a list of initiatives. And so I think because the strategy isn't really taught in a useful way in business schools anymore, I think it once was to a greater extent, but isn't now. And there's this dominant thing that of budgeting that is planning friendly rather than strategy friendly. I think people just default to stuff they know, and I think it's a shame, and it's particularly a shame because when companies do the technocratic version of this and just plan, they say, well, we'll do this initiative and this initiative and this initiative and this initiative and this initiative, and then the budget says we will make this much money, and then you don't make that much money. And they say, well, but we did all these initiatives. How can it possibly be that we don't make the money we said we were going to make? Well, it gets back to what I said at the start. That set of decisions are a random set of decisions that don't compel the customer to give their money to you, your revenues to you, rather than to somebody else. And it's sort of become routine, the way strategy is done. So that's why I call it the lost art.
I mean, as the CFO here at Openspace, I'll make sure not to let our budgeting exercise get in the way of our strategy.
See, for me, budgeting exercise is the sort of the kind of interesting thing about budgeting exercise to me is revenue forecasting. Like, there are literally hundreds of millions, if not billions, of person hours spent a year on revenue forecasting. And I find almost zero utility to it.
People like to kind of see where things have been and where they're going. I guess that gives us a semblance of rationale to
Sure.
where you're pouring your resources.
But why is it that you saying something's in your budget, what relation will that have to that revenue actually showing up? People seem to think it will, right? Oh, it's in our budget, so then it'll show up. That's not how customers think. Customers couldn't give one little care in the world about what's in your budget, right? They decide whether they want to buy something on the basis of it. Is it a compelling offering? And so any revenue budget is just made up stuff of little or no value. Sorry for a CFO to say that, but it is.
No, that's definitely very useful. It's a useful perspective.
So costs, you see, are if I ask the question, who is the customer of your costs? I think the answer is you, right? The company is the customer of its costs. It decides how many people to hire, how many square feet to rent, how many dollars of raw materials to buy. So all of that is actually, it's important to have a budget for that, because you're saying we're going to do all these things, right? And we control them. We could stop them in mid-year, some of them at least in mid-year if we felt like it. And so that's important to do. But all of that activity, if it's going to be a successful company, has got a theory of competition that says if we spend in all these ways, we will produce this kind of customer reaction, right? But all of that customer reaction is utter speculation, and the fact that you have a revenue budget doesn't matter a whit. So I'm just flabbergasted at how much time people waste on that. And for what it's worth, I never give advice that I don't use myself. And so when I was in the consulting company that I have built called Monitor Company, I was running it for a period of time, and I did as an experiment. I eliminated revenue forecasting and a thing that went with it, which is deploying to the partners a revenue target. Right, Omesh, you've been a partner for a long time. You're more senior. You have to produce $12 million of revenue. Kind of David, oh, you've just become a partner. You're more junior. You have to do 3 million, and you add that up to get to the amount that you really want to have, right? And everybody said, well, that's essential. You have to have that to set goals and targets for people, and blah 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 blah. And I said, here's what I see happening with that is if Omesh, his clients were on an upswing, by halfway through the year, Omesh will know, yeah, I'm going to make the 12 easily. And then Omesh takes his pedal off the proverbial metal, swans around the office with his chest pumped up saying, man, am I good? And so we end up doing less revenue than would have otherwise been the case if we didn't have those forecasts and those budgets. And then David, whose clients are doing really badly, they just happen to be on a down cycle, and it takes a while to replace them with new clients, is freaking out because he's not going to make his $3 million total. And then that's going to have a terrible compensation effect. So he's going at clawing at his clients. Oh, please buy something from me. And so those clients are like, oh God, get away from me. So you lose clients. I said, that's the only things that come from revenue budgeting and forecasting. And so I banned all of that. We had no revenue budget. The directors didn't have revenue goals. We just said, you know what we do? Try and do as much good business as you can. We had our single most profitable year in the history of the firm at that point.
That's really interesting. So you think about strategy, like you mentioned, it's more creative. It's coming up with a theory that you believe is going to help you win. And if we go down that path, how do you kind of along the way know whether it's working? How do you create some kind of feedback loop or check-ins to iterate as necessary? As you mentioned, this whole process is iterative and ongoing. How do you know that it's working and when you might need to change something? Hopefully before you run out of chips.
Yeah. No, I mean, you should have an expectation, right? I don't think making a forecast and asking everybody how much they're going to do is useful, but you should say, we're deploying this many dollars, right, against this task, the task of compelling customers to give us their revenues, to award us with their purchases. And I think it's perfectly fine to say, we'll be all happy if we make whatever, 180 million because our costs are 110 million and we want to make 70 million. That's totally fine to say. But I would actually just treat it as a plug, right? Right. So
Sure.
happiness would be associated with 180 because we make 70, and that's good. And so I would then map it out. And if it's like a flat business that doesn't have massive seasonality, I would just say after kind of 1 month, gee, have we made $15 million in revenues flow over the transom? And if the answer is no, I'd say, well, if it's 14.9, I might say, don't tweak the dials, just keep going. But if it's 10, I would say, we have to do one of two things. We want to have one thing was to be accept it's going to be more like 120 million, or change the pattern of what we're doing. Say that set of choices isn't as compelling as we thought it would be. How can we make it more compelling? How can we try something different? So that's how I would do it. So it's not as though I you don't care about revenues or think about revenues. It's just the idea of forecasting them. That's the thing I think is crazy. How much time do people spend, oh, I think we can do this much or whatever.
I think this kind of thinking comes a lot more naturally to actually the companies that we tend to work with in the venture capital space, because just by nature they're looking to disrupt an industry. They're looking to create a new market for which it's almost impossible to really forecast in any credible way. They're looking to solve a problem in a better way, and so I think that kind of gels quite naturally into those questions that you spoke about.
Well, for what it's worth, I think so. Like I have an unusual investment strategy in life. So I don't invest in any public equities, none. I invest in early stage startup, like pre-A, B kind of rounds, and cash. That's it. Those are the two things. And so I invest like crazy in very early stage venture investments. And I just basically, when I decide to invest, one thing I don't look at, and it freaks them out, I do not look at their financial projections. Those are just all made up, right? They have no idea. That's just made up. But instead, I ask them questions that get me an answer to the question of, do you have a coherent where to play, how to win capabilities management systems? So yes, I again, I eat the dog food. I apply this to my own investing. And some people I just say, no, I'm not interested at all. Sorry, good luck to you and everything. And they're like, but how can you say that? Look at our financials. They're our projections are like, kind of awesome. And I'm saying, I hope you make those. I have zero confidence you will, but I hope you do. But I'm not investing. But they sort of think that because they've made these projections of revenue, that is somehow causally related to the revenues actually showing up, and it's not, right? There's no causal driver.
So how how powerful would you say strategy is? Like, if we're talking about venture capital, early stage companies, they might be tackling a problem which is maybe not well addressed, but is being addressed by huge incumbents with lots of infrastructure, capital, and so on, and being a initially small disruptive force. Employing this way of thinking, do you have an example where of a success story, for example, where somebody's employed this kind of employed a strategy as opposed to a plan, and won a market?
Sure. I mean, I used to, when I was dean, I used to live in Canada, so I ended up investing a bunch in Canada, invested in a company called Wealthsimple. And it was Canada's essentially first robo-investor. And it was essentially taking on the dominant players, the five gigantic commercial banks in Canada that have 85 or so percent of all the deposits, all the assets. And so you could say, oh, how could a little startup kind of beat up on these big companies? But what they said is that, the cost structure of that business is just huge, right? And the fees charged are commensurate with the huge cost structure. We're going to do this kind of with AI, and we're going to be able to collect assets easily because we'll be able to take less from them in fees for the return that we can promise. And when you ask the question, this is I always say that your where to play, how to win, and capabilities has to pass the can't won't test. Your competitors either can't or won't replicate your where to play, how to win choice. And on that one, I was supremely confident because for the big banks to respond, right, they'd have to take a huge hit on their installed base of clients by charging them a lot less. So they were going to sit there and hope that this didn't work, right? And it worked, and there's no response other than one big financial institution bought a chunk of it and has the right to take it out at an extraordinary price. And I forget what it is. I think it's up. My investment is up 25 times on that. And
Oh,
I
wow.
refuse
Congratulations.
oh, thank you. But I've got a bunch like that, but not a whole bunch, but a decent number. And they tried to get us to sell in the last round, and I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, there's lots more to come. So that was a clear where to play, how to win. When the CEO came to visit me, I asked him enough questions to see whether he knew where to play, how to win, assessed the Cantwell tests, and said it's worth the investment. Do all my investments do that? No. I make mistakes in kind of judging these things, but I'm sure as hell a lot more up than down. So lots of people say, oh, strategies for really big companies. No, it's not. Every company has a strategy, whether they claim it is or not. Strategy is what you do, not what you say. And so I can spend an hour with any entrepreneur and figure out what they're doing, and from that intuit their strategy, and then say, do I like this strategy or not?
That's really good perspective. So strategy is making choices, and another thing that you've said in the past is you've thought about how people should make choices if they're faced with either or decisions. I found that really interesting way to think about things when you're in a situation where you're thinking, should I do this or should I do that? Can you share with us that framework, as opposed to using pros and cons and deciding one against the other? You tend to look at a pro kind of chart instead.
So typically when people are trying, they've come down to a decision, and there is you either can go left or right, and it feels like you can't do both. And people tend to just choose, and I say they choose the least worst solution, not the best solution. And instead I say you should do something that I wrote a book on, well, 2 books on, called Integrative Thinking, where you sequentially fall in love with the two models, right? If we go back to Four Seasons, Issy Sharp, the founder of the world's most successful, largest luxury hotel chain in the world. His first hotel was a little roadside motel. Then he built a big city center convention hotel. Because those were the two forms of hotels that people would finance. Are you a little motel, or are you one of these big hotels? And he didn't love either, but felt at first that he had a choice. I had to do one versus the other. And instead, what he did was he looked at what he loved about small motels, the pros, if you will, to that. And rather than focus on the cons of them, said, what are the pros of the big convention hotels? And he said, gee, the thing that I love about small motels is their feeling of warmth and comfort. Everything else I could take or leave. Big city center convention hotels, what I like about that is the amenities. They've got everything. They've got workout rooms, multiple restaurants, convention space, blah, 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 all this stuff, shopping, etc. And so he said, that's the only thing I like. I don't like anything else particularly about them. And he said, how can I combine those two things to create a new model, which ended up being the medium-sized luxury hotel with a completely unique form of service that was homey and comfortable, yet luxurious, and took that to become the biggest and most successful hotel chain in the world. It's not by saying I have to make either or choices. It's rather saying I actually won't make either or choices. When they're really painful, I'm not going to make them. I'm going to use that as a signal that I've got to innovate and create something new.
And so you take what you love about each of the choices and try to create a new choice, which a lot of which the majority of people would not have done, and that would give you an advantage.
Yeah, and that's what happens time and time again out there. Other people choose one or the other and have to suffer from the negatives of each. If instead you say, no, there's pros we can put together in new and interesting ways, you can create something wonderful. And one of the sad things is again, this is where I think business schools are not doing big favors. They're teaching business as applied economics, and economics, and I'm an economist, so I say bad things about economists, and I feel I can do that. Economics is the study of trade-offs, and so people come out of Samantha Ghoshal, a great, now late professor at London Business School, made this point. He said, it's all about trade-offs, and if you think of the world as trade-offs, you will create the world that you think it is. You'll make trade-offs, right? And that won't solve any problems, won't make anything better, and you'll see more trade-offs and more trade-offs, and that's all because economics has taken over business education and teaches trade-offs. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If instead you just reject the idea that trade-offs are inevitable, then you can create new and wonderful things and get the confidence to do that again and again.
And I understand this is something that even kids are naturally inclined to do. Integrative thinking. That was quite fascinating. That we might actually be moving away from something that makes so much sense because of what we learn in school before we
Yeah.
try to relearn it.
No, it's sad. It's sad. And one of the funnest things I did while I was dean and teaching integrative thinking to graduate students was a fine woman named Ellie Avishai, who was a student at the Rotman School, went off and started teaching this to kids. And we now successfully can teach integrative thinking to kids as young as kindergarten. And it's wonderful to see them create new things. Yeah, yeah. It's called the I Think Initiative. If anybody wants to look it up, just Google it, the I Think Initiative, and they'll see all the cool stuff we're doing.
Before we wrap up, you have written a lot of content. You've done a lot of interviews, books, including Playing to Win, Creating Great Choices, and even most recently, A New Way to Think. If somebody wanted to start their learning journey and really become an expert at the Roger Martin School of Strategy Excellence, where would you advise them to start amongst all the content that you have?
Well, if you really is strategy that you're interested, I would read Playing to Win and then go to my Medium series, which is now 2 years long. I do 52 straight weeks and then a wrap up, so it's actually 106 1,500 word to 2,000 word pieces on the practitioner insights on strategy. And you can find my website is just www.rogerlmartin.com. They're on there. The great thing about Medium, and I'm a big fan of Medium because content is yours, not theirs, and so you can do things like put it all on a website so that it's easy for people to find. So I would do those two things: read Playing to Win, and then read the Playing to Win practitioner insights from 1 to 106, and you'll know lots about strategy.
Excellent. Roger, thanks so much. It's been really insightful. I think we've the objective was to whet the appetite of our viewers to understand there is a different way to think about strategy, and I'm sure they'll find all your advice incredibly insightful. Thanks for being so generous with your time on the craft today.
It's my pleasure, Omesh. Thanks for taking the time with me, and good luck with your ventures.